I lay curled up on the tiny couch in my apartment, bare feet tucked under a thin throw, steam rising from the chipped mug of green tea in my hand. My other hand rested on my forehead like it could stop the buzzing in my brain. The phone on the coffee table lit up again. Mom, Dad, Aaron. Their names blinked across the screen like a warning light that never turned off. 30 missed calls in the last 2 days alone. They weren't subtle. They never were. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I left. No slamming doors, no messy fights. I just disappeared. I remember it clearly. One quiet Tuesday evening, I packed a few clothes, my beat-up laptop, and a financial planning notebook into a duffel bag I'd had since college. The sun was dipping behind the apartment buildings when I walked out. No one stopped me. No one even asked where I was going. It was like I had always been the background noise in my own life. They were used to that version of me, Ellie Hart, 28, the dependable one, the practical daughter with the steady job in finance, the one who always paid the internet bill when they forgot, the one who just understands money better. But what they never understood was that I wasn't born to be the family safety net. Aaron, my older brother by 4 years, was the dreamer, the artist, the one Mom hugged when he failed his fifth side hustle and Dad proudly defended like he was a soldier back from war. Me? I didn't cause chaos, so they never paid attention. When I left, Dad was fixated on a spreadsheet, Mom was watching one of those endless crime shows, and Aaron was sprawled across the couch, headset on, deep into a video game tournament. I walked right past all three, bag over my shoulder, and not a single one looked up. Now the phone buzzed with urgency like their world had just noticed it was missing a key cog in the machine. I didn't answer. I just leaned back, let my shoulders relax, and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt what peace might actually look like. My story isn't about a dramatic fallout or some grand betrayal in a single moment. It was slow, draining, like a leak in the ceiling you ignore until the whole roof caves in. I started working at 16. Not because I wanted extra pocket money like my friends, but because I had to. After school, I'd bike to a tiny bakery and scrub floors until my hands were raw. My first paycheck went straight into buying a secondhand laptop, no stickers, no flair, just functional. Nobody asked how I was doing. But when Aaron's new art tablet broke, Mom drove to the store that same night to finance a brand new one. He needs tools to succeed, she said. And what about me? I was the tool. Aaron quit jobs like they were toxic relationships. Every boss was abusive, every coworker too competitive. And Mom? She'd nod like it all made sense. Nobody thrives in a hostile environment, she'd whisper, already reaching for her wallet. Meanwhile, when I got into Georgia Tech on a full ride, the only response I got was, "You really want to be that far away from your family?" I used to think if I just kept showing up, kept proving myself, they'd finally see me. But the more I gave, the more I disappeared. Every time they needed help rent short, water turned off, car broke down, I was the one they called. And I always answered. I justified it in my head. I have a good job. I make decent money. What's the harm? But helping out became full-on support. Aaron wanted to take a digital design course. Could I spot him $300 just until he sells a few prints? Dad's back was hurting. Could I order his supplements? The good ones, not the off-brand stuff. They needed gas, groceries, a roof patch, new tires. One by one, I said yes. Until one day, the mortgage. I was sitting at my desk at work, already exhausted, when Dad called. Voice low, serious. "Elle, we're falling behind on the mortgage. Just for a couple of months, until we figure things out." "We're good for it." I told him I'd think about it. That night, I canceled the deposit on the apartment I'd been saving for. I transferred $980 to cover their payment, the first of many. And just like that, I became the silent provider of a household I no longer lived in. 2 years, $22,000. And not once did they say thank you. No one asked if I could afford it. No one wondered if I was okay. They just expected it. One Saturday, I came by the house with groceries. It was my routine. I'd drop off food, clean out the fridge, leave. But this time, Mom met me at the door, arms crossed. "Ellie, we need to talk. What you're sending each month, it's not enough anymore." I blinked. "Not enough?" Dad walked in. "You live alone. You don't have a family to take care of. Meanwhile, we're struggling. Doesn't that seem unfair?" I stared at them, at the people who raised me, at my brother lounging on the couch with a soda in hand, eyes glued to his game. Unfair? I said slowly. You mean after I've paid your mortgage for 2 years? Paid for your meds, your car repairs, Aaron's Photoshop class? Aaron didn't even look up. It's not like you're starving. And that's when something inside me broke. I set the bags down on the counter. Didn't unpack them. Didn't restock the fridge. Didn't say another word. Just looked my mother in the eye and said, if that's how you feel, then this is the last time you'll ever need to worry about what I send. Then I walked out, and this time, no one stopped me. I didn't drive home right away after walking out of my parents' house. Instead, I pulled into a quiet gas station a few blocks away, parked under a dim streetlight, and sat there for what felt like an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel like it could hold me together. The rain had picked up, tapping softly against the windshield, almost rhythmic, like the universe trying to calm me down. I watched the droplets blur the lights of the city outside, and for once, I didn't feel like rushing. No errands, no calls, no expectations, just the quiet, raw silence that follows a final decision. That night, I blocked all 3 numbers, Mom, Dad, and Aaron, not out of spite, but because I needed the noise to stop. I needed to hear my own thoughts for once. I knew there would be backlash, dramatic texts, guilt-laced voicemails, long paragraphs about betrayal and how I abandoned the people who loved me the most. But I had nothing more to give. That realization came with a strange calm, like stepping off a treadmill that had been running nonstop for years. I went back to my apartment, took a long shower, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat on the floor with a cup of tea, staring at the quiet walls like they were holding me together. The next few weeks were quiet, beautifully, terrifyingly quiet. No surprise bills, no midnight emergencies, no last-minute grocery runs. My mornings started with coffee and sunlight, not my mother's voice telling me about some payment Dad forgot to make. I slept better, ate better. I even started reading again. Small, forgotten habits that felt like tiny rebellions. I had my first free weekend in years and spent it walking around the city with no destination, letting the sun hit my face without needing to check my phone every 10 minutes. For the first time, I was living a life that was mine, not one rented out to everyone else. I thought maybe they'd get the message. Maybe the silence would finally teach them that love isn't supposed to feel like obligation. But silence doesn't fix people who refuse to listen. About a month after I cut contact, the email started. First, one from Mom. It was short. Ellie, your dad got a letter from the bank. Things are serious. Please call me. I didn't respond. Then another one, longer, layered in guilt. I don't know what's happening to you lately. You've changed. Your family needs you. We're desperate. Please don't turn your back on us now, as if I hadn't already been carrying them for years. Still, I stayed silent. I had to. Because the second you answer, you're pulled back into their orbit. And I knew how that went. One favor turns into 10, and suddenly you're back to making excuses for skipping your own life. But that didn't stop the messages. Aaron started emailing too. His tone was different, less desperate, more entitled. We all make sacrifices, Ellie. You're not the only one dealing with stress, but refusing to help now is just cruel. That was the word that got me. Cruel. Not once had he worked a full-time job for more than 3 months. Not once did he pay a bill or show up when I needed support. And yet, somehow I was the cruel one. 2 months into my new life, I found myself back on my budgeting app. Not to send money, but to actually plan for myself. I set up a savings goal for a down payment on a real home, my home. One that wouldn't come with guilt trips or last-minute calls. Every time I transferred money into that savings account, I felt like I was rebuilding a part of me that had been chipped away. I even joined a local community group, nothing major, just weekend meetups in the park, yoga, a book club. It felt foreign at first, like I had to relearn what it meant to have time for my own life. But slowly, it started to feel normal. Then came the voicemail that shook me back to reality. I was leaving work late one evening, walking through the parking garage, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to listen. It was Dad. His voice was lower than usual, like he had finally run out of energy to pretend. Ellie, the house. We might lose it. The bank's been calling every day. We're out of time. Please, just call me back. He didn't even say goodbye. Just silence. I stood there in the cold cement garage, keys in hand, phone pressed against my ear, and I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Maybe a little of both. I thought about all the money I'd sent. All the months I paid their mortgage without so much as a thank you. And now they were still behind? Something didn't add up. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into the account I used for mortgage transfers. It was still linked to Dad's name. I hadn't looked at the actual statements before. I just trusted them. Trusted that the money was being used the way they said it was. But the moment I opened the history, my stomach dropped. The last payment toward the mortgage had been made 8 months ago, long before I stopped helping. That meant the last few payments I sent thousands of dollars had gone somewhere else. I checked my own transfer records. Everything lined up, every dollar accounted for. But none of it went to the bank after that last payment. I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of it. Had they just pocketed it? Used it for something else and lied? My chest tightened. I'd given up my apartment fund for this. Put my own life on hold to save a house that apparently hadn't even been maintained. I thought about all the times they looked me in the eye, claimed they were struggling, claimed they just needed a little help to stay afloat. And the whole time, they were already sinking. Or worse, they never even tried to stay above water. I didn't call right away. I needed to process what I had just learned. I needed to be sure before confronting them. The next morning, I contacted the mortgage company directly. After a few security checks and a long hold, I finally got a representative on the line. I explained that I had previously helped make payments and was checking on the current status. Her voice was professional but kind. The account is currently 8 months delinquent and under special review for foreclosure proceedings, she said. My mouth went dry. So there's been no payment since early this year, she confirmed. I thanked her and hung up, my fingers trembling as I closed the laptop. There it was. Proof. My support had never gone where it was supposed to. They had lied to me, repeatedly, not just about being behind, but about using the money for the house at all. I didn't know what was worse, the betrayal or the fact that part of me wasn't even surprised. I remembered every pleading message, every emotional manipulation, every "we're just trying to keep our home," but it was all a front, a performance. And I was the one buying the tickets. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept seeing numbers in my head, transaction dates, amounts, balances. I had been treated like a wallet with a heartbeat, and even after I left, they still assumed I'd keep paying without question. The next day, I sent a single text. I spoke to the bank. They said the house is 8 months past due. I kept sending money. Where did it go? No response. Hours passed. Then finally, the phone rang. It was Dad. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear another excuse. Another performance. I just stared at the screen, heart pounding, letting it ring out. And when it stopped, I let out a slow breath. I was done playing their game. I knew they'd try to spin it. That was always the pattern. First, the guilt, then the excuses, then the rage when guilt stopped working. When I didn't pick up Dad's call, he left a voicemail. His voice was lower this time, almost like he was trying to sound calm but didn't know how. Ellie, I know what this looks like. But it's not what you think. We needed that money for some urgent things. We meant to pay it back. We just didn't expect things to get worse so fast. He paused like he was waiting for my forgiveness through the phone, then added, "Just call us, okay? We can figure this out together." I listened to the entire message in silence, holding my phone like it might break if I gripped it any harder. I didn't feel anger yet. That would come later. What I felt first was that familiar wave of exhaustion, the kind you get after running towards something you already know you'll never catch. I had been trying to earn trust in a place where truth had always been optional. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the carpet, thinking about how long I had let myself believe that helping them would lead to something respect, appreciation, maybe even love that wasn't tied to usefulness. But now it was obvious. They weren't just careless. They were comfortable lying to me, comfortable watching me give up my own goals while they quietly reallocated the money to God knows what. That night, I didn't reach out. I didn't respond. I needed more than explanations. I needed honesty. And they had already proven they didn't deal in that currency. The next afternoon, I got an email from Aaron. The subject line just said, "Family." The body of the message was short and almost insultingly casual. Ellie, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Yeah, maybe mom and dad weren't super transparent, but it's not like they wasted the money. Things came up. Life happens. Don't turn this into a war. One stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, stunned at how easily he dismissed everything. Not a single acknowledgement of my sacrifice. No apology. Just the same tone he always used. Like I was being dramatic for setting boundaries. That was the moment I realized he'd never see it. He never had to struggle. He never had to pause his life so someone else could keep theirs running. To him, life happens meant someone else cleans up after you while you figure things out. I deleted the email without replying. If he wanted a war, I wasn't giving him one. But I wasn't backing down either. I needed answers, not from them, but from the evidence. I went through my records again, pulled out every statement, every receipt, every payment transfer I'd made since the day they first asked for help with the mortgage. The pattern was clear. For nearly a year after that, I'd been sending between $900 and $1,200 every month, always on time, always to the same account. I found 3 transactions labeled overage fund, each around $300, and I remember Dad asking for just a bit more those months to cover extra repairs. Now I wasn't sure if there had ever been repairs at all. I never saw invoices, never saw photos, never even got a thank you. Just more asks. I looked at the total. Over $22,000 in less than 2 years. I closed my laptop, sat back, and let the number settle into my chest. It wasn't just money. It was stolen trust, stolen time, and I wasn't even sure that house still had running water. A few days passed. Then one evening, just as I was pouring a cup of tea, my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered out of habit. Ellie, it's Mom. Her voice was strained, but not soft. There was no warmth in it, just tension. I heard you called the bank, she said, skipping any pretense of how I was doing. I don't appreciate you going behind our backs like that. If you had questions, you should have come to us. I closed my eyes. There it was again, the way she always deflected, made it about my behavior instead of the truth she didn't want to admit. I stayed quiet for a second, then said, I did come to you every month for 2 years, and I never once asked where the money was going because I trusted you. There was a pause. Then she said, we were overwhelmed, Ellie. You don't understand what it's like. Aaron lost his contract work. Your dad's been having health problems. Things snowballed. I leaned against the counter and asked the question I'd been holding on to since I saw the bank report. Why didn't you pay the mortgage? Her response wasn't direct. It was a slow backpedal into excuses. We had to pay down some other debts first. There were things we couldn't ignore. Medical bills, credit cards. We thought we could catch up. That was the most honest she'd been. And still, it wasn't an answer, just a soft dodge wrapped in guilt. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. A crisis followed by silence, then a lie disguised as a favor to me. You didn't even tell me, I said. You just let me keep sending money, knowing the house was already sinking. She sounded tired now. You're being cruel, Ellie. We're your parents. We didn't do this to hurt you. But that's the thing. It didn't matter whether it was intentional. What mattered was they did it anyway, and never once thought to stop. After that call, I didn't hear from them for 3 days. Then a new message came in from Dad. This one was short. You said you wanted honesty. Fine. The money helped us cover some personal debts. We didn't think it would get this bad. We're not proud of it. But we're still your family. That has to mean something. I stared at the message and felt nothing. Not rage, not relief, just emptiness. I didn't want more apologies. I wanted accountability. I wanted anyone to say they saw what this did to me. But all I ever got was justification. Always a reason, always a bigger problem than my own. The final straw came that weekend. I was walking out of the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I saw a notification from Venmo. Aaron had tried to request $200 from me. The note said, for Mom's meds, we're all doing our part. I stood in the parking lot, blinking at my phone in disbelief. That wasn't just audacity. That was proof they still didn't get it. That even after everything, even after the lies and manipulations were laid bare, they still believed I owed them something. I declined the request. No message, no explanation, just no. It was a small act, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they'd chipped away for years. That night, I finally allowed myself to feel angry, not the quiet resentment I'd carried for years, but real, sharp anger. Not because they were struggling, but because I had given them everything I had and they treated it like an allowance. I remembered the nights I skipped dinner to stretch my budget, the vacations I never took, the apartment I never moved into, all so they could make choices without consequences. I wasn't angry for saying no. I was angry I hadn't said it sooner. By Monday, I made a decision. I called the mortgage company and had my name removed from anything related to that account. I told them I would no longer be involved. I sent an email to Mom, Dad, and Aaron. No emotion, no drama, just facts. Effective immediately, I will no longer be providing financial support. Do not request money. Do not imply responsibility. I've done my part. You'll need to handle the rest. Then I blocked them again. Not to punish, but to protect. I didn't know what they'd do with that information. I didn't care. I had finally closed a chapter I should have ended years ago. There's a strange kind of silence that settles in after you cut someone off. Not the loud silence filled with what-ifs or regrets, but the quiet one that feels almost hollow, like standing in an empty room after the furniture's been cleared out. The noise is gone, but the echoes still bounce around for a while. That's what my life felt like in the weeks after I sent that final message and blocked them all again. I didn't cry. I didn't replay their voices or scroll through old photos. I just moved on, slowly, deliberately. The weight they'd placed on me for years had been lifted, but it left bruises, and I could still feel the pressure in certain moments checking my bank balance, hearing a ringtone that sounded too familiar, seeing someone on the street who looked like Aaron from the side. But for the most part, I was finally able to breathe in my own space, without debt or guilt crowding the corners. I spent the following month fixing things, nothing dramatic, just small restorations of self. I reworked my budget, adjusted my goals, started cooking again instead of living on takeout and caffeine. My apartment, once just a quiet escape, began to feel like home. I bought a small bookshelf and filled it with titles I'd promised myself I'd read years ago. I swapped my ancient laptop for a newer model, not top tier, but reliable, and signed up for a course on personal investing. Not because I had a plan yet, but because I finally had time and mental space to think about a future that wasn't chained to someone else's survival. It was surreal how much clarity came once the noise was gone. I used to think peace was earned through sacrifice. Turns out it's born in boundaries. Even my weekends looked different. I didn't dread Friday nights anymore. I'd go on walks through the park, sometimes for hours, just observing people living their lives like they weren't constantly tethered to someone else's expectations. One Sunday afternoon, I stumbled upon a small street market, handmade candles, local artists, fresh pastries, and wandered around aimlessly until I found a booth selling prints of watercolor cityscapes. The vendor smiled and asked if I was an artist. I almost laughed. I said no, but in that moment, I realized I could have been. Not because I had a secret talent, but because I had forgotten I could be anything at all. For so long, my identity had been rooted in function, in what I could give, what I could fix. Without that role, I was rediscovering who I actually was. Then came the email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Miriam, my mom's older sister. She was always the outlier, quiet, private, lived out in the suburbs, and rarely showed up for family gatherings. But she had never been unkind. The subject line read, I wasn't sure if I should reach out. My hands hesitated over the trackpad. I clicked it anyway. The message was careful, warm, and free of judgment. She said she'd recently spoken with my mother, who mentioned I'd cut ties. She wasn't writing to interfere, she explained, but to say that if I ever needed to talk or simply wanted a neutral space, she'd be there. No pressure, just an open door. I read the message twice. It didn't accuse or demand. It didn't beg for sides or use guilt as currency. It was the first communication in months that didn't ask me for something. And that made it feel rare. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't ready to dip back into anything related to my family, even from a distance. But I saved it, not just in my inbox, but in my mind. A reminder that not everyone in my bloodline operated on entitlement and manipulation. Sometimes, kindness could still exist quietly, without expectation. About a week later, I was at work when my phone lit up with a notification from the bank. At first, I thought it was just a statement update. But then I saw the subject line, Notice of Final Foreclosure, property at 1382 Whitmore Drive. My breath caught in my throat. That was the address of my parents' house. I clicked the message, heart pounding, and scanned the details. It confirmed everything. The house was officially going into foreclosure. The grace period had ended. They were out of time. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I wasn't shocked. I had expected this. But seeing it in writing made it real in a way that voicemails and pleading emails hadn't. The house I grew up in, the one I used to imagine returning to after college, the one I had saved again and again, without ever living in it myself, gone. I thought maybe I'd feel triumphant. That part of me would whisper, they deserved this. But instead, all I felt was tired. Not grief, not pity, just the ache of something finally falling after you've held it up far too long. That night, I lit one of the candles I'd bought at the street market, sat on the floor with my tea, and tried to make peace with the end of a chapter that never really gave me a beginning. It was strange to mourn a house that never truly felt like home. But still, I remembered the small things, the creaky hallway outside my old room, the way sunlight used to pour in through the kitchen window, the swing set Dad built when I was 8. Memories can hold both love and damage at once. And that's what made it complicated. It wasn't about the building, it was what it represented. The version of family I wanted to believe in. The hope that things might someday balance out. But hope without action is just a story we tell ourselves to avoid letting go. 2 days later, I received another email. This one from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was spam, but it was legitimate. Attached was a scanned letter with my name on it, formally notifying me that my name had been included as a financial contributor in some documents related to the house. Apparently, at some point during those 2 years, Dad had tried to co-sign certain payment agreements in my name without telling me. Nothing had moved forward because I never signed anything, but the lawyer wanted to confirm that I was aware. I wasn't. I was stunned. I reread the letter over and over. My own father had quietly tried to use my name as leverage. Not just my money, my name, my credit, my future, and never said a word. That was the moment the numbness cracked and the anger finally came. Hot, sharp, clear, not rage, not the kind that explodes. This was cold fury, the kind that settles deep in your bones. I sat there, hands shaking, and whispered aloud. They would have dragged me down with them. And the truth is, they already had. But this was the line. They didn't just ask for help. They tried to take it without permission. I spent the next day on the phone, contacted the lawyer, confirmed my non-involvement, requested documentation stating I had never signed or agreed to any debt related to the property. Then I called my own financial advisor and added extra safeguards to my credit, password protections, freezes, monitors. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building walls, not out of fear, but because I had finally accepted that love without respect is just a slower form of destruction. That weekend, I responded to Aunt Miriam. I thanked her for reaching out, told her I appreciated the message. I didn't go into detail, just said I was doing okay, that I was starting fresh. She replied within hours, said she was glad to hear it, offered to meet for coffee sometime. I said maybe. Not because I wasn't open to it, but because I was still learning what safety felt like. And sometimes, healing means not rushing into new spaces until you figured out how to stand in your own. By the end of the month, I had officially started a new savings goal, a real one. Not just emergency funds for other people. I began researching first-time homebuyer options, not because I was in a rush to leave my apartment, but because it felt good to dream again. To imagine a space where I wasn't paying for someone else's second chance. A place where I could hang art on the walls without hearing Aaron say I was wasting money. A place with no memories layered in disappointment. For the first time, I felt the ground under my feet was mine. No more balancing on shifting promises. No more guilt-built loyalty. Just quiet, steady steps in a direction that belonged to me. It had been almost 4 months since I last spoke to my family, and the silence had settled like dust in an abandoned room. Quiet, but always there. My days had taken on a rhythm early mornings with soft light through the window, black coffee in a chipped mug, work that no longer felt like an escape, but a space I actually wanted to grow in. I started sleeping through the night again. My dreams weren't tangled with voices asking for things I could no longer give. I even started writing a little, something I hadn't done since college. Just thoughts and ideas, but they came from me and not from the pressure of being someone else's solution. That was progress. And I was proud of it. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, which is why when I saw his name on my screen, my chest clenched before I even read the message. Aaron. No subject line, just a single sentence in the preview. You deserve to know what really happened. I didn't want to open it. Not because I was scared of what it said, but because I had finally built something clean out of the wreckage, and I didn't know if I was ready to dig through ashes again. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. It sits quietly, waiting. So later that night, after work, after dinner, after convincing myself I wouldn't, I opened it. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs, but it changed everything. He didn't start with an apology. That would have felt fake anyway. He started with a question, "Do you remember the day you left?" What Mom said. And I did. Every word. If it's such a burden, then don't come back. He said what I didn't know was that after I left, things didn't just fall apart, they imploded. The credit cards they'd used in my name without telling me were frozen. The side account Dad had opened to redirect some of the mortgage funds had been flagged for irregular activity. Apparently, one of the banks launched a fraud investigation and everything spiraled. Aaron said he didn't know about any of it until months later, that he'd just been told I pulled away and abandoned them. But when he found out the truth when he saw the bank notices, the debt trail, the forged signature attempts, he said he started asking questions, said he got stonewalled. That Mom insisted it was temporary and Dad told him it was handled. But it wasn't, not even close. He didn't defend what they did, didn't excuse it either. But he said something that stuck with me. I think they convinced themselves it wasn't wrong because it was you. Because you always forgave them, always helped. They thought you'd just keep doing it. I read that line over and over, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed something I hadn't said out loud. They didn't just use me. They built a system where using me felt normal, justified, expected. Aaron ended the email by saying he wasn't writing to reconnect, wasn't asking for money or forgiveness. He just thought I should know. Then he signed off with, "You were right to leave. I just wish I had seen it sooner." I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, reading those words again and again. There was no relief, just a cold sort of validation. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't abandoned them. I escaped. For a moment, I wondered if this was his version of closure or if he was trying to hand me mine. But I didn't reply. Not right away. Not out of anger, just instinct. Some truths don't require conversation. They only require space to land. That night, I pulled out my old journal, the one I'd buried in the back of my closet. I hadn't written in it since my first job out of college. I flipped through the pages, seeing versions of myself I'd forgotten. A girl working 70-hour weeks, calculating grocery costs to the penny, and still sending half her paycheck home. I saw the entry from the week I canceled my apartment deposit to help with their temporary situation. I saw my handwriting change over time from hopeful to hurried to tired. And it hit me. I had been writing this story for years, just never with an ending. The next morning, I wrote one last entry. I started with one sentence. They didn't break me, they emptied me. And somehow, that distinction mattered, because being broken means you're shattered beyond repair. But emptied can be refilled, rebuilt, reimagined. I closed the journal, wrapped it in a piece of fabric, and stored it in a small box. Not because I wanted to hold on to the past, but because I needed to remember the path I walked to get here. The choices, the clarity, the cost. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Shaky, but familiar. It was from my mother. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for 2 days, letting it sit on my kitchen counter like a guest I wasn't sure I wanted to entertain. On the third morning, I tore it open slowly. It started without a greeting. No, dear Ellie, just her voice in words, exactly the way she always sounded when she was trying to stay composed. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. Said she didn't recognize the damage they'd caused until everything collapsed. Said she realized too late that silence wasn't peace, it was erasure. That she had erased my needs, my voice, my personhood in favor of comfort and control. She wrote that she missed me, not for what I did, but for who I was before they drained me. Then she wrote something that felt different. You didn't walk away from family. You walked away from a version of us that never saw you clearly. And I can't blame you for that. For the first time, I felt something shift. Not reconciliation, not healing, but honesty. Raw and unpolished. It didn't erase anything, but it acknowledged everything. And that was a start. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't appreciate the letter, but because I didn't know what I wanted yet. Forgiveness wasn't a switch, it was a process. And I had only just begun mine. But I tucked the letter into the back of a drawer, not out of obligation, but because one day I might want to read it again. Maybe even believe it fully. Spring came early that year. The air smelled different, lighter. I found myself opening the windows more, letting the breeze move through the apartment like it was cleansing something I couldn't name. I made a list of things I wanted to do, real things, not reactionary tasks like scrambling to fix someone else's life. I wanted to take a solo trip, somewhere coastal and quiet. I wanted to paint something, even if it was terrible. I wanted to volunteer, not out of guilt, but from joy. And I wanted to buy a chair for my reading corner, something cozy and mine. One Saturday, I visited an antique store I'd passed 100 times but never entered. And there, in the back corner, tucked between a shelf of dusty record players and a crooked lamp, was a deep blue armchair with wooden arms and velvet upholstery. I sat in it, leaned back and closed my eyes. It felt like it had been waiting for someone. For me. I bought it without hesitation, carried it home like a victory trophy, set it by the window and stacked my favorite books beside it. That night, I curled up in it with a blanket and a cup of tea, the city glowing outside my window, and I realized something I hadn't been able to see clearly before. All the things I thought I needed from them, approval, gratitude, belonging, I had learned to give to myself. Not because they finally came around, but because I stopped waiting for them to. Some endings don't come with a bang or a breakdown. Sometimes they arrive like the slow bloom of spring, quietly rewriting the landscape without asking for attention. That's how the final chapter of this story began, not with another crisis or confrontation, but with an email from a realtor. I'd been browsing listings casually for months, more a daydream than a plan, but one property caught my eye, a small townhouse on the edge of the city. Nothing extravagant, but clean, sunlit, and tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac that felt more like a village than a suburb. I visited once, then again, and on the third visit, as I stood on the back porch with wind brushing against my shoulders, I knew this wasn't a backup plan, this was mine. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. My savings, for once untouched by someone else's emergency, covered the deposit. The loan was pre-approved, no cosigner, no explaining where my money went. Just me, a signature that belonged only to me. The day I got the keys, I didn't cry, I didn't celebrate. I just stood in the middle of the empty living room, surrounded by silence, and breathed. The walls echoed slightly, bare and waiting. But the echo didn't scare me. It sounded like potential. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not coworkers, not even Aunt Miriam, who had slowly become a gentle presence in my life through short emails and kind check-ins. This space was sacred. It wasn't built from pain, but from persistence. No one had given it to me. No one could take it away. That mattered more than I thought it would. 3 weeks after moving in, I received another letter, handwritten, this time from Dad. I recognized his penmanship, immediately stiff, careful, the kind of writing that looks like someone's trying not to make a mistake. He started by saying he'd heard about the foreclosure being finalized, that everything had been packed into a storage unit, and they were staying in a small apartment out in Doraville. He didn't ask for help, didn't ask for money. He wrote about how quiet it had gotten between them, how Aaron barely spoke to either of them anymore, how Mom still talked like I'd come back eventually. Then he said this, "There's something I never told you, and maybe I should have. Maybe it would have changed everything, or maybe it would have made it worse, but I need to say it now." What followed was a confession, Back when I was in college, when things got tight and the economy dipped, he had taken out a small loan under both our names, without telling me. He justified it by saying I was too young to understand how bad things were, that it was just a buffer until he got back on his feet. But the payments fell behind, and eventually it slipped into collections. He paid it off years later and never mentioned it, assuming if I didn't notice, it was fine. But it had been on my record once, and he thought I should know. I sat at the kitchen counter, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, not because of the content, but because of the timing. Now, after everything. He waited until the last bridge was ash to say what should have been said years ago. And yet, there was no fire in me this time. Just a quiet understanding that I couldn't carry this too. That there was no weight left in my heart for betrayal disguised as protection. I placed the letter in a folder with the rest, not out of nostalgia, but because one day I might want to remember how far I walked without them, and how each lie laid the stone for my own path forward. A week later, I saw Aunt Miriam for coffee. We sat outside a small cafe tucked between two bookstores. She brought me a plant for my new home, a little potted rosemary bush that smelled like something I could grow into. We didn't talk about my parents, not directly, but she said something as we sipped our drinks that stayed with me. Sometimes the people who raise us are so broken themselves, they don't know they're breaking us too, and that doesn't excuse it. But it explains why healing can't start with them. I nodded. Not because I needed the permission, but because someone finally understood without me having to explain. Spring turned into summer. My new home began to fill with pieces of myself, an old record player in the corner, mismatched mugs from thrift stores, a rug I picked without asking if it matched anything. The bookshelf grew. The chair became my favorite place to end the day. I planted herbs on the windowsill. Some lived, some didn't. But even the dead ones felt like part of something I was building with my own hands. Peace, it turns out, isn't always a perfect space. Sometimes it's messy and quiet and real. Then one afternoon, a message came from an unknown number. Just a few words. If we lose everything, I hope you can live with yourself. I didn't respond. I didn't even save the number. I just stared at it, then deleted it without a second thought. Not because it didn't sting, but because I refused to let that narrative shape the rest of my life. Guilt was their currency, but I was no longer buying. What they lost was never mine to keep. And what I gained came not from revenge, but from reclaiming the one thing they never truly gave me, myself. I used to think forgiveness was a door I had to walk back through, that maybe one day I'd return and say I understood. But forgiveness, I learned, is something softer. It doesn't mean reunion. It doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to carry the anger anymore. Not for them, but for me. So I let it go, piece by piece. Not because they asked, but because I was done holding things that didn't belong to me. One evening, I sat on my porch as the sun slipped below the rooftops. The air was warm. My tea was cooling in my hand. And for the first time, I felt still. Not waiting, not escaping, just still. I thought about the version of me who had quietly packed her things and walked out without a single person noticing. I wanted to tell her that she wasn't weak for leaving, that her silence was not surrender, it was survival, and eventually it would become her strength. This is not a story of revenge. Not really. It's a story of remembering, of recognizing that sometimes the only way to love yourself is to walk away from the people who taught you that love has to hurt. I didn't win anything. I didn't destroy anyone. I just stopped giving until it cost me nothing left. And in doing so, I found what I'd been looking for all along. Not approval, not closure, but peace. So if you're reading this and you've been the one holding everything together while breaking quietly in the background, I hope you know this: you don't have to explain your boundaries to people who never respected them. You don't have to destroy yourself to be seen. And if one day you choose to walk away, not out of spite, but out of necessity, that choice will not make you heartless. It will make you whole. Story 2. My sister's garden served as the venue for the birthday celebration. A contemporary farmhouse on the outskirts of Austin, with a long table covered in white lace and lights strung through each tree limb, seems like it belongs in a wedding magazine. Harper and Lily, my twin nieces, had recently celebrated their 8th birthday. Their costumes were similar, shimmering, pink, and sequined. They had fishtail braids in their hair and bows as large as their hands. I was surrounded by people I had not seen in a long time. For good cause, mostly. As we entered that packed garden, I clutched my daughter Ellie's hand. She had chosen a glittering blue headband that morning because it looked like a smiling star, and she had just turned 7. I could feel Ellie's small shoulders stiffen as we entered, since she was a shy person who was never quite comfortable in crowds. She also produced 2 homemade cards with pictures of suns and rainbows, and she had practiced saying happy birthday all the way there. I reminded myself that it was already a win to have the guts to come. In the middle of it all, I saw my sister Abigail smiling heartily while holding a sparkling champagne glass. She nodded slightly as our eyes locked, then turned away as if I were a cleaner who had arrived late. I got that tight-lipped grin from my mom. "Don't make a scene," she would often advise. As though the chili cut in his hand were the most significant thing in the world, my dad didn't even glance up from his plate of sandwiches. The candle blowing was immediately followed by the distribution of gift bags. Every youngster that was called up received a tote bag made of glittering cloth with their names inscribed in sparkling script. I got a peek of the presents inside: bespoke water bottles with their initials, handcrafted bracelets, imported lollipops, and little plush animals. The happy squeals like a second Christmas. It was Ellie's time next. A little, crumpled white paper bag was given to my sister by an adult who was most likely one of her friends. There were no embellishments, only a black marker scrawl on the front of a crooked yellow sticky note. Next time, give it more effort. Ellie was there. Hold on. It must be a joke, she thought, looking at the bag as if she were attempting to misinterpret it. But there was no jovial laughing. Slowly, as though still expecting for something nice, she opened the bag. A dusty gray eraser, a stained mint, and a broken pencil. Nothing else? No explanation, no notes. She faced me. She squeezed my hand, her eyes gleaming. Without knowing what I was hearing, I was familiar with that sensation. That gut-level perplexity, that sense of having done something incorrectly. Abigail started giggling. When she believed she was being hilarious, she would laugh sharply. She claimed to have been a bit over the top lately, such as joking, sobbing, interfering, and being too sensitive to little details. It was only a polite reminder. My mother laughed as well. "Really, Nancy, it's excellent for her. You spoil her too much." Like it was all a foolish play, my dad grumbled. They were making him sit through it. I glanced at Ellie below. She tried to grin. When children are struggling to contain their tears, they grin in a twisted manner. In the throng, nobody else appeared to notice. Even worse, they opted to chuckle despite noticing. My spouse, Jason, was standing next to me. Without uttering a word, he just removed the bag from Ellie's grasp and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. "Let's go grab you something truly delicious." Taking Ellie's hands, we left the party in silence, but with a goal. It was like folks walking out of a burning home. Nobody intervened. Nobody yelled. Abigail didn't even bother to look. And I realized that this was no longer a party. This was the last line and a warning. Ellie sat quietly in the back seat of the car on the way home, clutching the ripped white bag as if she was still processing what had happened. Jason's gaze met mine in the rearview mirror. Stormy, yet calm. Nobody said anything. At one point, even the vehicle radio had been switched off, creating an odd sort of quiet. The 3 of us were holding our breath, waiting for something to break when we arrived home. But it wasn't painful. Instead of running to her room like she always did, Ellie did not. Pulling off the glittery headband, she set the present bag on the table and crawled onto the couch, cuddling up behind the thin Thanksgiving blanket. Last year, Jason gave it to her. The 2 crayon-colored cards were still in her hand. Now, the stars she had sketched were smeared, as if they were blending together. Did I forget to express my gratitude? With hardly a breath in her voice, Ellie asked, "The card is still in focus." My heart constricted. I sat next to her and touched her hand tenderly. "It wasn't your fault, Ellie. The reason wasn't that you forgot anything." I took a moment to make sure my tone was forceful and clear. "You have nothing to do with the fact that some individuals lose the ability to be nice." She gave a nod. Seldom. Then, as if it were a paper shield, she hugged the card to her chest. However, they might have loved it more if I had done a better job drawing it. I wanted to make a big statement that would improve the situation. You shouldn't have to work for that affection. However, I was unable to find the appropriate words. As though I could erase every thoughtless comment that had ever been directed at her heart, I just drew her into my arms and hugged her close. Jason entered with 2 mugs of hot tea after Ellie fell asleep in my arms. He sat thoughtfully across from me. He claimed that this had nothing to do with a paper bag. I gave a nod. I am aware. What is the current number of times? Without requiring a response, he inquired. Your mother claimed your pie was too salty when you brought it to Thanksgiving. When Ellie dressed strangely, according to your sister, when she started making loud sounds, your father advised her to calm down instead. I let out a sigh. For Ellie, I used to hope that they would change. I believed that if I was polite and patient enough, people would eventually recognize her true self. Jason put down his cup. However, they don't. They have no desire to, because they would have to acknowledge that their treatment of you was incorrect if they saw Ellie. I turned to see my daughter sleeping peacefully, holding her card as if it were a dream. She was unwilling to let go. I cannot allow this to occur once again. Jason nodded, but he didn't say anything. Not with consent, but with tacit consent. Similar to a promise. I got up and made my way to my home office drawer, the one in which I stored transient items. Things the first once believed I would eventually deal with. When my sister texted me to ask me to watch the twins so she could take a week off from the stress, I paid my parents' utility bills. The promise to reimburse me for the storm-related roof repairs lingered in the air. I had printed it all out and placed it in a folder without a name. I silently opened the cover and took out a marker and a blank page. I wrote slowly and purposefully in order to document the truth rather than to threaten or punish. I taped the yellow sticky note, which was wrinkled, from Ellie's gift bag to the upper right corner. Next time, try harder with the words. It was still there, tilted like a smirk. When Jason entered, he saw me putting it on the folder's first page. He remained silent. He put a hand on my shoulder after that. We're not going back this time, shall we? That evening, I didn't squeeze his hand again. I didn't get any sleep. I listened to Ellie's steady breathing in the dark while I sat next to her bed. I recalled all the times I had kept quiet. I was constantly told that I was overreacting, too demanding, and too sensitive. I also swallowed it, hesitant to exacerbate the situation. However, this was no longer about me. Ellie was the subject of this. Ellie also merited a different start. I would begin organizing things tomorrow, my heart and the house. But tonight, I just sat there and whispered a promise while watching over her sound sleep. She will never be harmed again, not while my chest is still full of breath. I was always the one left out, as 3 witnesses attest to, and I grew up in a 4-bedroom home. My sister Abigail was the kind of child parents build their hopes on and repeat like a tired refrain. Straight A student, hair, always neat, knew how to talk to adults and never made a fuss. Every word, every move she made was met with warm smiles and gentle pats on the back. And me, the child who asked too many whys, got distracted easily and never quite learned how to please a crowd, was often left out of the frame. I remember back in 3rd grade when my teacher chose me as the inspiration of the month for helping a classmate learn to read. I ran home with the certificate, still smelling of fresh ink. My mom picked it up, glanced at it, and said, "Your sister was chosen 3 months in a row, but congratulations." Then she turned back to finish her favorite TV drama. There was no cake, no text in the family group chat like the ones that always showed up whenever Abigail won a school debate competition. When I started drawing, though, I wasn't very good. I really loved it. My dad said, "You should do something more practical, like your sister studying finance. Art doesn't put food on the table." My sketches slowly ended up in my desk drawer collecting dust, and eventually even I forgot about them. I used to think I was just too sensitive. I blamed myself for feeling left out, for feeling compared. I tried to do everything right, kept my room clean, finished homework before dinner, never needed to be asked twice, but it was never enough. I was still the one stuck in the front seat whenever we went on family trips, because the better seats were for Abigail. She gets carsick easily. I was still the one who had to give up my favorite food, because your sister really enjoys that dish. My feelings were never seen as valid when I cried after my best friend turned her back on me. My mom said, "What did you do to upset her?" Don't overcomplicate things. When I said I felt sad for no reason, she let out a sigh. Kids these days always think something's wrong just to get attention. No one ever asked why I was sad. They just wanted me to stop so they wouldn't be bothered. I grew up believing that love was something to be earned, that I was only worth caring about when I wasn't a burden. When I did everything right, and if I ever felt wounded, it was my fault for being too sensitive. It wasn't until college, when I finally got out of that suffocating environment, that I learned not all families are like that. I met Jason my senior year. He was the first person who actually listened without interrupting or blowing me off with worthless advice. The first time I sobbed because I missed home, even though I couldn't think of a single item I missed. He merely laid his hand on my back, saying nothing. He didn't have to. The first time Jason met my family, he kept silent during the whole dinner. Then as we were in the car, he responded, "I understand it. I didn't have to explain the route." My mom questioned everything about Abigail's employment, but failed to ask what I did. The way my dad talked to Jason about his accomplished daughter without once looking in my direction, he saw everything. And then Ellie came along. Her appearance made me feel I could alter things. I wanted her to have what I never did, a complete family holiday gatherings, memories with grandparents, aunts, and uncles. I've forgiven my parents, my dad, Abigail, or at least tried to lay aside the hurt so Ellie wouldn't lose out. I disregarded the mocking remarks about my parenting, her fashion choices, and the fact that she disliked being touched. I dismissed the moments when Ellie gave me a wide-eyed look and said, "Mom, why does Grandma shake her head like that?" When I speak, I kept telling myself that they would love Ellie, accept her, and change if I was gentle and patient enough. The present bag with the yellow message till that day. When I saw Abigail's joyful laugh and Ellie's tight grin, I knew I was mistaken. Ellie wasn't the beginning of the trend. I was the first to do it, and it wouldn't end with her if I didn't take action. It was more than simply a celebration. It was an exact replica of what I had experienced. This time, though, it went straight to my daughter's heart. When Ellie was 4, I began to notice something wasn't quite right. It started with seemingly innocuous comments, such as when she attended a classmate's birthday party wearing a purple dress with a star motif. It's not the appropriate attire for a little girl. When my mother saw the picture I uploaded, she stated bluntly, and Abigail texted with a sly smile, "Hopefully she is not interested in fashion." I typed it off with a giggle. Children swipe past it since they have their own style. I told myself that I was exaggerating. However, the minor remarks began to accumulate. During a holiday visit, Ellie once refused to give her grandfather a hug. Whispering, "I don't want to be touched," she withdrew her hand and huddled behind me. In front of everyone, my mother scowled and spoke aggressively. "Today's youth are really impolite. Who will enjoy her behavior like that?" Abigail started giggling. I suppose she inherits her mother's traits. Very sentimental and enjoys dominating others. I gently raised my voice and clarified that Ellie wanted her boundaries to be respected, since she was sensitive to physical contact. My parents simply had perplexed and agitated expression. "Are you teaching her to disregard fundamental etiquette?" My father spoke as though that were the whole truth. I made an effort to explain Ellie's reaction to loud noises and her need for time to get used to new individuals. Nobody paid attention to the fact that this was a part of her worldview. I was labeled anew each time I established a barrier to keep her safe. Overly cautious. A snowplow. At a Christmas event, Abigail placed a noisy toy directly in front of Ellie, making Mom too nervous. Ellie was shocked, covered her ears, and started crying when I explicitly begged not to bring her. Abigail shrugged and glanced at me without saying sorry. We refer to this as real-world training. There is no volume control in life. As I carried Ellie out of the living room, I felt her entire body tremble. Behind me, I heard my mom whisper, "Everything constantly makes her overreact." Now, how many times have I left that house with Ellie cradled in my arms and pressed to my chest? However, I recall the familiar sensation. Like when I was summoned, difficult, too sentimental, unmanageable. It was my daughter now, though. I believed I was resilient enough to bear it. Why is it sufficient to keep the past and present apart? However, I was mistaken. Ellie is now experiencing a repetition of how they treated me. Same script, but a different name, very similar to me in the past. Ellie is beginning to learn how to get smaller. Keep silent. Hold off on speaking till the appropriate time. When Ellie was 6 years old, she brought home a watercolor picture one afternoon that included gentle spirals and a combination of blues and purples. "What did you paint?" I inquired. "I painted my sentiments since I don't know how to express them," she added. I went cold. In that response, I recognized myself. Once, a youngster had to illustrate her feelings as no one allowed her to express them verbally. I gave Abigail a call that evening. I made an effort to remain composed and stated that Ellie was being harmed by the taunting and that she should be respected. I received a dry laugh in response. "Are you serious? How are children going to make it through life if they can't take a few remarks? Quit transferring your emotions to your daughter." I ended the call. Jason was beside me. His voice was steady and low, yet I was still on his laptop. "How many times have they informed you that the issue is in your head?" I didn't respond. Ellie was on my mind. If I continued to allow her to be drawn into the loop, what type of person would she end up becoming? I anticipated the inquiry. "Is it worth severing relationships and preventing your child from seeing her grandparents or other family members?" I used to worry that Ellie would lose a member of her family if I did. But my vision is clearer than ever today. She is not forced to diminish herself to meet the demands of her family. She can be herself with her family without worrying about criticism or ridicule. And I won't hesitate to defend my daughter's wholeness of soul if it means maintaining harmony in a poisonous home. Despite not getting much sleep, I woke up earlier than usual the morning following the birthday celebration. The first rays of light streaked over the hardwood floor as they slipped through the window, as though to tell me that today would be different. It was peaceful and kind. It was because I was finishing, not because of what was coming. Jason had a cup of coffee while sitting in the kitchen. Even though his eyes were still hazy, he looked at the big brown folder I placed on the table and nodded as if he had been anticipating this moment for a while. "Where should we begin?" he inquired. I flipped through the pages of the folder after opening it. They were all memories I had brushed aside. I convinced myself it wasn't a big problem or tried to forget. Abigail texted me to ask if I could help pay for her auto repairs because my paychecks didn't go through this month. There were screenshots of those texts. An email from my mom last year regarding their utilities being shut off due to a billing error and asking me to cover for the 4th time in 2 years. In fact, even a bill with my name on the internet service at my parents' house, even though I moved out when I was still single, was followed by a brief thank you but no repayment. I also copied out passages from earlier diary entries about family get-togethers, in which Ellie was made fun of and I was reprimanded for failing to toughen her up. I divide them into categories on money, abusive language, emotional neglect, and harmful habits that recur. I then carefully labeled them and clipped each one. Last but not least, I adhered a yellow sticky note to the cover. No lengthy justification. Only 3 words. "That's sufficient." 3 copies were printed by Jason. 1 remained with us. Abigail would get one. I intended to send Aunt Margaret the final one, the only family member who ever let me into her heart. She told me once, silence can sometimes be interpreted as complicity. I knew she would comprehend. After I assisted with the majority of the down payment, Abigail moved to her neighborhood, a peaceful little suburb in Fort Worth, and I drove there that afternoon. I used to believe that supporting her would preserve our tenuous bond. I realized now that I had only widened a wound that would never go away. The bell was not rung by me. I just put the envelope right outside her door, then took a few steps back. Jason sat in the vehicle. I took one final glance at the home. Potted plants on the porch. At one point, I gave her the SUV that I had assisted with the deposit on, and she recognized it all for what it was, a shabby stage show. By the time I checked my phone that night, I had finally figured out how to leave. Abigail had missed 17 calls. I didn't respond to any of them. My mother had left a message. "What are you doing? Do you intend to destroy everything?" I didn't answer. I merely opened my email, sent it to all of my relatives on my contact list, and attached the scanned PDF of the file. Everyone who has ever inquired as to why I no longer attend family gatherings. It was a straightforward topic line. In case you were wondering why I didn't show up the next morning, Uncle Louie in Kansas responded, "You have a lot of courage, yet this is difficult. I hope Ellie lives in a more equitable society." One line came from a relative in Oregon. "I'm proud of you. I didn't want people to take sides. All I wanted was for the truth to be known." Jason terminated all of the accounts that we had been covertly maintaining for my family throughout the years. Abigail previously requested us to cover a few months' worth of expenses, including phone bills, insurance premiums, and college assistance for her oldest kid. It was all over in a single afternoon. No justifications. "I'm not sorry." A knock on the door came 3 days later. Through the peephole, I peered. My mom was the one. Even though her eyes were red, she still had the same expression that made me feel 10 years old all over again. Part accusation, part pleading. The door was not opened by me. Jason was standing next to me, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder. There was nothing for him to say. A piece of paper that my mother placed in the mailbox. I took it open. The front of the card said, "Thinking of you." Within, in her penmanship, "Family is where we are able to forgive one another. Don't allow little matters to ruin familial bonds." From the folder I had prepared the day before, I stealthily removed the yellow sticky note and scribbled a new line beneath the words. That's sufficient. When it persists for years, it is not a minor matter. After adhering it to the card, I put it back in the mailbox for pickup. I slept well that night for the first time in years. No doubts, no dreams, or just silence. Finally, in that silence, I heard something that, as a youngster, I had never been permitted to hear. My own voice was clear and unflinching. I distributed the file to the entire family, but it wasn't even 24 hours later. A frantic symphony of buzzing began to fill my phone. Abigail sent the initial message. "Don't say hello, just all capitals." "What are you doing, in your opinion?" A series of lengthy texts that included denial, guilt-tripping, and subliminal threats followed. "It was only a joke. Why do you want me to be the bad guy? This family was just ruined by you because of one stupid gift bag. If you continue, I'll get an attorney." My folks then sent me texts. My father's was short, only a single line. "That's sufficient, Nancy." My mother's was more emotional and lengthier, but it lacked the one thing I had been longing for. "I apologize." She included a handwritten message in the subject line of an email she sent. "Give the past some space." Ellie was sleeping on the couch, nestled under a blanket, clutching her beloved teddy bear when I opened the envelope. The home was so silent that it seemed to be holding its breath with me as Jason worked in the backyard. Cream-colored stationery with flowery borders was used to write my mother's letter. She still writes neatly and precisely, similar to how she used to mark my first-grade assignments. However, the information seemed too familiar. An ancient song with somewhat updated lyrics. "Family is the only thing to turn to when all else fails, even if it's never perfect. The most precious connection you will ever have is being severed. You cannot continue to harbor little grievances from the past. Consider Ellie. She needs her cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents." In Masquerade of Love, the last phrase ended with a warning. "Ellie will accuse you of stealing her family if you don't return one day." When I opened the letter, I'm not sure what I was expecting. Perhaps a recognition, a moment of conscience, a moment of candor. However, I just received the same echo that I had been hearing for years, one in which every transgression was sugar-coated and referred to as family. I took a seat and took out a black marker and a blank piece of paper from the drawer. No lengthy speech. I just wrote, "I also missed my family in the past." I shipped it back after folding it and putting it in the previous envelope. No explanation, no signature. I learned a few days later that Abigail had made a lengthy Facebook post criticizing a family member who, in a fit of pride, publicly discussed personal issues to harm someone's reputation. Support was abundant in the comments, primarily from her close pals. Some even tagged me with statements like, "You can learn to forgive, but you can't choose your family." A small misunderstanding in the end shouldn't cause sisters to turn against one another. I remained silent, but a few hours later, I received a private message from a Minnesota relative I hadn't spoken to in years. "If the information you entered in that file is accurate, it's not only an apology she owes you. I'm not sure how widespread this will be, but I do know one thing for certain. I didn't feel guilty about defending myself for the first time in my life." Ellie came running in from the backyard one late Saturday afternoon while I was in the kitchen arranging flowers. Untidy, muddy-haired hands with gleaming eyes, she yelled, Zoe and I used towels to construct a whole tent. Do you want to see? I put down the scissors, grinned, and nodded. I'm always interested in what you make. As we entered the yard, I recalled a story my mother had told me when I was a child and had received a poor arithmetic grade. Keep your weaknesses hidden from others. It will be used against you. However, I've discovered something new. You can defend yourself when you are aware of your weak points. More significantly, I use the unwavering love I never experienced to teach Ellie that every day. Ellie started to change in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on, but I could sense it strongly as summer gave way to the early autumn winds. She continued to laugh. Light, unburdened laughs. Not the kind that aims for approval. As if she could breathe in a place that was hers at last. Lena and Joy, two local girls who also enjoyed finger painting and exchanged friendship bracelets weekly, were the new friends she made in her Tuesday afternoon art class. As Joy fastened a green yarn bracelet to Ellie's wrist, I silently observed from a distance. Her eyes glowed as if she had just received a medal. Nobody there told her she needed to get tougher, or that she was too sensitive. Furthermore, I was aware that she was growing up in a safer environment than mine. The old nightlight was replaced with warm, gentle light from paper lanterns that we hung throughout Ellie's room. Would make a child's nerves weak, my mother used to say. I let Ellie choose the new bedding, which has watercolor-like pastel swirls, because according to her, it resembles the sky after rain. For the first time in years, I put a picture of Jason, Ellie, and I in the middle of the new bookcase I got for the living room. No more photos of Abigail or my parents. I had let go, not because I was angry. Ellie and I read books together at night. She reads to me on certain evenings, fumbling yet confident. On certain evenings, she questioned me directly. Have you ever felt afraid, Mom? When grown-ups make mistakes, why don't they apologize? I stopped avoiding. I was honest with her, even if it was only a silent yes and a nod. I'm not as afraid as I once was. My phone rang one Saturday afternoon as I was cleaning the kitchen counter. There was Abigail on the screen. Just 6 words later, a text message appeared that was colder and shorter than any lengthy conversation, but I had no intention of responding. Are you content now? You prevailed. The message was read 3 times by me. I was trying to see whether I felt anything, not because I didn't understand. Was it painful? Was I upset? Was I happy? I didn't win, thus I felt absolutely nothing. There was never a contest here. Neither a winner nor a loser emerged. I was alone. A mother who at last fulfilled a childhood desire of mine of having someone do it for me. Protect, step in, and don't turn around. I secured the screen. Didn't respond. Ellie came into the kitchen with a fresh sketch that night. 3 stick figures, a bearded one, a happy youngster on the roof, and a little home with a rainbow garden surrounding it were seen holding hands in front of the house. She had created a piece that allowed me to be myself. Next to the scrawled work notes and weekly menu plan, I pinned it on the refrigerator. To me, it was a miracle, yet it was an everyday event. A few weeks later, Ellie received an invitation to speak at the family day at her school, when each student chose a loved one to sit next to them while they read a piece they had written. I was her choice. Her writing consisted of just 3 phrases. I'm liked and trusted at home. My home is with my mom, and I feel secure there. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't help but cry. From release, not from agony. When Jason took us out for ice cream that evening, Ellie asked her mother whether she would be upset if Aunt Abigail texted her again. I brushed her hair with a grin. No, I won't be angry, but I also don't have to respond because sometimes the best course of action is to remain silent and continue to live our lives normally. I want to live well too, Ellie said in a murmur after nodding. Similar to you. In the peaceful serenity of the automobile going into the night, I turned to face Jason and saw his gentle grin, the type of look that comes from someone who knows deep down that we made the right decision. I knew I didn't need anyone's approval. I already had the most convincing evidence that Nancy was correct, so I didn't need anybody else to confirm it. A youngster raised in a loving, safe, and trusting environment. I sat by myself in my home office that night after Ellie had gone to sleep. Old sticky notes were illuminated by the gentle golden light from my desk lamp. Parent-teacher conferences, therapy appointments, and calendar pages with red circles on them. the day of the birthday celebration that will never be forgotten. We had moved on from it all. Ellie and I had settled into a calm life that was measured in little increments. The gentle murmur of water from the small fish tank and her laughing as she baked cookies in the kitchen. Even at the quietest times, like this one, something still found its way in, even if Jason had just set up the cozy shimmer of paper lanterns every night. A quiet shadow of a question. Did I make the correct decision? Cutting up contact with my own family was perhaps the most difficult thing I have ever had to do. On other evenings, I lay awake because I was hurting, not because I regretted it. I questioned if I should have appealed, sobbed in front of them, or provided additional details. Would they have been different? At the party, should I have responded more forcefully? Shouted it out in public? Defended Ellie by taking a strong public stance? Or was it a silent retreat? The most powerful action I could have taken? I didn't say anything. I had endured enough pointless debates, not because I was weak. When I wanted my daughter to live in peace for the rest of her life, I didn't need to win a little battle. I occasionally reflect on my mother, the things she never said, and how she advised me to keep things simple. Are you okay instead of asking? Even when his eyes darted in response to Abigail's teasing at dinner, I see my father remaining silent and never intervening. Despite knowing, he remained silent. That is not the kind of world I want Ellie to grow up in. A society where expressing feelings is viewed as excessive and quiet is valued for tranquility. Some families aren't designed to be kept, according to what I once read. They must be released. And when I watch Ellie laughing without seeking permission, drawing without shuddering, and making friends without looking down, it hasn't been easy, even though I know I wasn't mistaken. Doubt still occurs occasionally. Dreams of family meals where Abigail doesn't make fun of me still wake me up. My father grabs my hand and apologizes when my mother really inquires about how I'm doing. Dreams so vivid that I forget they never happened, and perhaps never will for a few seconds after waking up. I gaze out the window at the trees, waving shadows in the dim streetlight. I imagine that every mother in the world has the same query. I've waited. Is speaking enough the correct thing to do? I don't know the answer, but I'm breaking free from the family label excuse cycle. I am unable to pick for you. However, I can say this. I used to be a neglected child who was molded by the expectations of others and made to be quiet, kind, and understanding. And I carried that with me throughout my early years. Although I cannot alter my history, I can alter Ellie's course in life. Therefore, I would want to ask whether you are reading this, have experienced something similar, or are balancing family tradition with your own or your child's mental stability. If your kid were involved, would you follow my example? If you were afraid of being called ungrateful, would you stay? Or would you leave to raise a new generation that didn't have to endure? Would you want to be silent or to interrupt the cycle with a letter or a scream? Or just a single stride forward without turning around? I don't have the ideal solution, but I do have Ellie, a kid who is growing up without having to hide her tears, without trying to earn affection, and without worrying about being called too often. And it's sufficient for me to know that I'm headed in the correct direction. How about you? There is more to my tale than a party, a bag of presents, or a few unpleasant remarks. It concerns the valiant effort to break a generational cycle of suffering and silence. In order to create a home that was genuinely secure for my daughter, I made the decision to leave behind biological ties that no longer supported us. I may not have won in the perspective of others, but I made the decision that felt right to me. Because keeping the entire family together does not lead to happiness. It results from safeguarding your child's tranquility, which is what really counts. How do you feel about the decision I made in this story? How would you safeguard your child if it were up to you? Leave a comment with your ideas. For more genuine, touching tales about family, remember to subscribe to the channel.